All right, chapter 33, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Shadow of War. As we started to emerge from the Great Depression in the United States, because everybody was either being drafted in the military or working in the factories, and there was zero unemployment, things started to heat up internationally, and war was looming. The London Conference in 1933 supposed to be across the Atlantic Ocean. Roosevelt was supposed to go meet there, and it was going to be a discussion about how to handle the worldwide depression. Originally, Roosevelt agreed to attend this conference in London to try to help the world get out of the Great Depression, but he made a decision to he changed his mind and made a decision not to go. The reason is because he had too much going on at home, still continuing to try to help our depression. It was 1933, and this was far from the depression being over. It was at probably its worst point in 1933. So this is before, as I just stated, we started to emerge from the depression. This is actually going back a little bit before that. So Roosevelt said, "Nope, I got too much going on at home. I'm not going to go to this conference." So that uh, says two things. One, yeah, we got a lot going on at home with this New Deal, and he had a lot of work to do. But also, hey, we're continuing our stance of isolationism. We're going to do it ourselves. We're not going to rely or help other people out. We're just going to rely on ourselves. Isolationism. It's a signal of that's continuing. All right. There was at this we Roosevelt had to play this game of we don't want to get involved internationally. However, we better start lining up allies just in case a war does happen. So here's the thing that Roosevelt knew is that there was a strong possibility that there was going to be a World War II. And there was a strong possibility at some point we as the United States may have to get into that war. So Roosevelt had to keep that secret because if he would have come out and said that, people would have freaked out and said, no way, we don't want to get involved in war. So he had to get us ready for war behind the public's back without them really knowing about it because for fear that they would freak out. So here's two examples of growing isolationism versus finding friends and allies just in case war does happen. The Tidings and McDuffie Act was passed that gave the Philippines their freedom and independence. It was passed in 1934 and basically said that 12 years from now, the Philippines are going to be free and independent. We're giving them their freedom and independence, a signal to Japan, hey, we're out. We're not out to try to take more territory. We're getting out of the Philippines. We're not a threat to you. So yeah, that shows our isolationism. At the same time, a year before, the United States formally recognized the Soviet Union. Remember, the Bolshevik Revolution happened in 1917 and the Red Scare happened, and we didn't want anything to do with the Soviet Union. We were angry because they were trying to spread communism, and we did not recognize their government there because of communism. However, in 1933, FDR formally recognized the Soviet Union, hoping that, or at least publicly saying that he wanted to have a grain deal with them. We needed grain trade, so wheat and grain. But deep down inside, Roosevelt knew if war started, he'd want the Soviet Union to be on our side and not the side of the enemy. So it's finding friends. It's no doubt about it, preparing for war just in case war does happen. Now it's going to be 8 years away, but Roosevelt knows he has some insight of what's going on internationally. Here's another example of finding friends. Roosevelt continued a policy of Hoover. This was originally a Hoover policy. Oftentimes Roosevelt gets credit for this, but probably unfairly, because some of the credit should go to Hoover, just as a lot of the New Deal legislation, some credit should be given to Hoover. But setting up a good neighbor policy, as opposed to Roosevelt's cousin TR, who was intervening in Latin America on a consistent basis. Now, Hoover came out and said, we are going to be a good neighbor to Latin American countries instead of world policemen barging down their doors all the time. And Roosevelt continued with that. And a big part of this is because Roosevelt wanted to find friends. would you rather have a long list of allies that support you in case war does happen? Absolutely. And it really does come to fruition when war hits, because every one of the Latin American countries declared war on Germany during World War II. So it was a pretty good plan. And it was something that paid off uh, down the road. And here is Roosevelt meeting with some of the Latin American dictators. Roosevelt also was given unprecedented presidential power in regard to the tariff. The president was given the power to be able to himself to lower a protective tariff up to 50% if the other country that we're trading with does the same. They called it reciprocal trade agreement. So no president has ever had that kind of power to do that. Any kind of tariff raising or lowering has always been done through Congress. However, in an emergency situation like this, where there's a worldwide depression and we need to promote international trade, Congress gave Roosevelt the power to be able to reduce our tariff with an independent or with an individual country by up to 50% if the other country does the same, promoting international trade. So again, trying to help things out with the continuing depression. Now, with the rise of post-World War I dictators, things were getting really contentious in the world. The rise of Hitler and his Nazi government in Germany after a failed attempt, and then jail. Hitler went to jail and wrote his Nazi Bible, basically was called Mein Kampf. While he was in prison, he wrote that, and then he came out, and a second coup attempt was successful, and Hitler took over and instituted a Nazi government in the 1930s in Germany. Mussolini instituted a fascist government in Italy. Italy was suffering financially, and it was prime for the taking. Italy was for a dictator like Mussolini to come in with this fascist. They called it fascism. Basically, it's another name for dictatorship. And then in 1935, Mussolini attacked Ethiopia, which had their primary weapon of choice was spears. And they were so low technology wise that they were easy. We would call it low hanging fruit, right? Easy to attack. It wasn't very difficult. But Mussolini wanted to get the ball rolling and taking over territory. Italy would be considered a have-not country. There were have countries like Germany, and Germany was taking over territory. Great Britain would be a have country. Even the United States would be a have country that they had been taking over territory in the previous years. Italy wanted to take over territory, and they started with Ethiopia. Stalin was the dictator in Russia, continuing with communism, and then Hirohito in Japan. So the post-World War I rise of dictators really, really made things difficult. And there's Hitler right there, and his right-hand man, the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. And there he is with his fiance, and then they got married just before his death, Eva Braun, who was a lot younger than Hitler. And there's Benito Mussolini, and you see Mussolini here with Hitler because they form an alliance with each other. As I spoke of the invasion of Ethiopia, it says here the Italians had claimed Ethiopia as their territory. With economic conditions worsening at home, Mussolini needed to take action that would distract the Italian people in 1936. The Italians fought against poorly armed Ethiopian troops, and the League of Nations censured Italy, but that comprised the extent of the world reaction to that. And it kind of opened the door for more aggressive action by other countries. And here's a Dr. Seuss, very, very well-known cartoonist who came out during this time. Dr. Seuss, we all know Dr. Seuss, very controversial these days for some of the things, some of his books and whatnot. I'm not sure all of it's fair, but he's in the news lately. It says here, try and pull the wings off these butterflies, Benito. And that was the invasion of Italy. When that would happen later on, we'll talk about that in the next chapter. And there is Joseph Stalin to the left. And here's the big three at the time, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. And they are at a conference here in Tehran. And we'll talk about that later on. A little bit about Joseph Stalin. Stalin would ultimately order between 50 million and 60 million deaths, far more than his hated rival Adolf Hitler. The entire population of Great Britain is 47 million people. Stalin, in effect, will eventually slaughter the equivalent of every man, woman, and child in Winston Churchill's beloved homeland. He will do so without compassion or guilt, all the while living a life of luxury and debauchery in stark contrast to the rigors of the communist lifestyles his government imposes. So some information about Stalin. Throughout the early years of the buildup of dictators in Europe, their Americans wanted to remain neutral in thought and in action, as Roosevelt liked to say. We wanted to make sure that we didn't take sides because we know that taking sides in World War I dragged us into that war. So here's just an example of how Americans felt. There's a Senate committee headed by North Dakota Senator Gerald Nye, and they investigated whether or not munitions manufacturers were pro-war for the sole purpose of making money during World War I. Did weapons manufacturers, because of their desire to sell more weapons, draw us into World War I when we shouldn't have been involved in World War I? So just an example of public sentiment about that. There were people that really truly believed that we shouldn't have got involved in World War I. It was just to make money. Obviously, that's probably not the case because we were selling weapons to the other countries. That didn't necessarily mean we had to get involved, but we did, and it caused a lot of resentment in the United States, and this is the hangover from that, so to speak. Americans just don't want to get involved, and it takes, as we'll talk about at the end of this chapter, the attack on Pearl Harbor to get everybody in sync and united when it comes to going to getting involved in World War II. Congress passed neutrality acts in 1935, 1936, and 1937, basically urging Americans to stay neutral. And later on, a lot of critics call this neutrality bury their head in the sand legislation. Americans continued to, people said, bury their head in the sand as things are happening internationally, and we're just turning a blind eye to it and allowing for Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and Hirohito to just spread far and wide and get more and more powerful. So here's another Dr. Seuss. I'm sure you recognize the sketches as Dr. Seuss. It's basically about neutrality, and it says, "What a lucky thing we've got separate beds." So it says here Europe, and then you have a lot of kids in that bed that are sick. And we know about how, especially now because of the pandemic, how germs are transferred. They are very close, but basically what Dr. Seuss is saying here is that, are we fooling ourselves? Do we really think that we could just sleep tight here, so close to what's going on, and that these germs won't spread over to us and make us sick? No, it's going to eventually happen. So he is saying we can't bury our head in the sand, basically. There was a civil war in Spain that we indirectly get involved in. We do not directly get involved in, but it kind of foreshadows what's going to happen later on. The Spanish rebels were led by a fascist General Francisco Franco, who was trying to take over the existing democratic government. And the existing democratic government pleaded with the United States and Great Britain for help financially and militarily. The United States said, nope, we're not going to get involved. Again, we're neutral. We don't want to get involved in anything. We're isolationists. Let's just stay out. Well, Franco was helped by Mussolini, and he was also helped by Hitler financially and militarily. And Franco was able to successfully take over the democratic government and instituted fascism in Spain. And again, what is this? How does this affect us? Not directly, but it does indirectly. It just shows you, how powerful some of these dictators are and how they're able to spread their ways far and wide. The other aggressive country, of course, was Japan. Japan was taking over territory. They invaded China. Millions of Chinese died at the hands of the Japanese, and it was pretty brutal. If you do any research on Japan's 10-year delve into China and all the deaths that happened and how cruel they were. FDR really again wanted to stay out and gave a speech in Chicago. It's known as the quarantine speech. He claimed that, look, we want to stay neutral, but we are going to quarantine the dictators. Quarantine the dictators. Again, we know what the word quarantine means now. In the years past, I might have to explain that, but with COVID, we know what a quarantine is. So quarantine the dictators, keep them away, don't do any business with that country, and we'll just stay away. That was controversial too, because people are going, what are you doing? You're going to really upset the dictators and they're going to be mad at us. That's what people were worried about, that the dictators might get mad at us and attack us. And in 1937, the Americans had a gunboat in going down a river in China to try to protect the Chinese. And maybe, I think they were going to go and pull out some Americans that were in China at the time. And the Japanese bombed the American river vessel. It was called the Panay. They claimed they didn't know it was an American vessel. They claimed it was cloudy on that day and that, they apologized and the Americans just accepted their apology. When in fact, we have actual film footage of it being a bright, clear blue sky, sunny, and a huge American flag flying off the mast of the Panay. So they pretty much lied, but we, gave in to them and said, all right, we'll accept your apologies. And there's Roosevelt giving his quarantine speech there. And there is actually the Panay as it just was about to go down. Appeasement. The Germans were aggressive in the mid 1930s under Hitler, and they were taking over territory. Now, remember this, after World War I, the treaty was signed, the Treaty of Versailles, that demanded that Germany disarm. Their subs were taken away from them. Their army was stripped down to just a bare minimum. Territory was lost. They lost a bunch of territory in the Treaty of Versailles. Well, Hitler's goal is to win all that back. And he starts secretly building up the military, calling it, Boy Scouts type stuff. His military, his Air Force called the Luftwaffe was practicing, and he was saying that they're actual clubs, they're glider clubs and they're airplane clubs, and they're not the military. He just flat out lied. And then they instituted mandatory military service for all Germans. And then he took the German Rhineland, which was previously taken away from him, taken away from Germany after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. He then went and made it his goal to exterminate millions of Jews with the goal of killing all Jews in Europe, blaming them for the loss in World War I and just using every excuse that he could to try to rally people around the idea that the Jews were the cause for so many bad things that were happening. That was his goal, was to rally those people. And he horribly went around, and every territory that he took over, their military went house to house looking for Jews. There was a conference that was called in Munich, and it was called by the British because of the concern that Hitler was too aggressive and that he was violating the Treaty of Versailles. So they set up a meeting in Munich, and it's known as the Munich Pact. They signed an agreement, and the agreement was basically that the Allies, the British would allow Germany to take part of Czechoslovakia as long as Hitler agreed to not take any more territory, that he would be done, he would take over no more territory. And Hitler shook their hands and said, yep, I agree. So the Munich Pact was signed. He was given part of Czechoslovakia, and basically the Munich Pact appeased Hitler. It's an attempt at appeasement, at getting him to stop doing something, giving him territory. Well, it was a proven failure. Within a matter of months of the signing of the Munich Pact, the tanks rumbled into the other part of Czechoslovakia, and he aggressively took that part also. And this is
another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
I'm hoping you could hear that. That was the Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, and he had a piece of paper there that you could see in the picture, and it was with Hitler's signature on it, and he said it meant peace in our time, and we know that that wasn't necessarily true. Here they are shaking hands. There's Hitler there, Chamberlain, and then within a matter of months, they took the rest of Czechoslovakia. And as I said, Jews were rounded up, and we'll talk more about this in class. I'll get into more detail on the Holocaust, but loading Jews in cattle cars on trains and taking them to places like Auschwitz and other places as well, which were prisoner of war camps that were horrific. And when you look at the numbers, the Holocaust numbers, 6 million Jews died at the hands of the Germans, and you see 90% of the Jewish population total of Poland was killed. Baltic countries, Germany and Austria, and Bohemia and Moravia, 90% of their Jewish population was killed. 67% of Europe's Jewish population was killed in the Holocaust. Just staggering numbers. And here are the different camps that were created. They were all over. Every red dot here represents one. Auschwitz being the most well known. They would be forced to live in dwellings like this. At the end, when the camps were liberated, the soldiers were shocked when they came across the men that looked like this, and all they wanted to do was feed them because they were so hungry. But they had to be careful what they fed them because their bodies were just so racked from not having barely any food. Something as simple as a candy bar, if they ate it, would kill them. So they had to be really careful about what they fed them and how they would rehabilitate them. I had the opportunity to speak to this lady that's on my left in the picture. I was on a cruise to Alaska, and I would come down for coffee every morning really early. And I started talking to this man here, and they were from Southern California, and he wanted to know what I did for a living. And I told him I was a history teacher, and he told me that his wife was a Holocaust survivor. And that's her in that picture right there. He explained her situation. He was not a Holocaust survivor, but his wife was. And then he said, yeah, I'll bring her down so you can meet her. And this is the picture that I was able to take. She was hard to talk to because she couldn't hear very well. And, she had trouble walking. She had a cane. But he told me a lot about her situation. And she did show me a tattoo that she had on her arm. That was her number that she had, from the camp. They tattoo their numbers on their arms. She was an incredible lady. The people of the United States were very, very concerned, to say the least, about the non-aggression pact that was signed on August 23rd in 1939. The USSR shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with Germany. Basically, it's an agreement made between Stalin and Hitler to allow each other to take territory. They put guidelines on, hey, you can have this territory, I'll take this territory. Russia would take half of Poland, and Germany was able to take the other half of Poland. Now, why were Americans panicking about this? Well, you've got a potential situation here where, you got an alliance. Now, if you have an alliance between Germany, Japan, and Russia and Italy, that'd be really, really hard to defeat that group. And Americans were very, very concerned about the non-aggression pact. And Germany was given permission to attack Poland, and they absolutely did. And on September 1st, 1939, the German tanks rumbled into Poland and took over that country. Not without a fight, but they took it over. But Americans were panicking before that. Little did they know it was a marriage of convenience, basically, because they each hated each other. It says here, this cartoon depicts German ruler Adolf Hitler marrying Russian ruler Joseph Stalin in reference to the non-aggression pact to which Germany and Russia agreed in 1939. The two nations had been enemies in the past, and Hitler would break the non-aggression pact a few years later by invading Russia. The caption underneath reads, "Wonder how long the honeymoon will last." So yeah, we'll talk later on about the breaking of the non-aggression pact, which Americans celebrated that because now Russia would be on our side. As I said, it was September 1st, 1939, when Poland was aggressively attacked by Germany. They called it Blitzkrieg because it was by air and by land. Americans had never seen, or in the world had never seen, the use of the airplane in war before the Germans started doing it. And then the Japanese would be also, as we'll find out, at Pearl Harbor. Poland fell within 3 weeks. But as soon as this happened on September 1st, 1939, as per an agreement in the Treaty of Versailles, France and Great Britain declared war on Germany, and World War II was on. Americans, though, remained neutral, right? The United States said, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to do it again. So World War II is on. Americans are sitting on the sidelines, and we will continue to do that until December 7th, 1941. And here's a menacing photo of the German army marching through Poland. And then they would, as I said before, go house to house looking for Jews. The bombing of Warsaw, here's Warsaw before, there it is after. There's literally nothing left there. And here it is today. Americans needed to, again, as I said earlier in the beginning of this chapter, they needed to make sure that we were preparing for war. The government had to make sure we were preparing for war, but we had to kind of be sneaky about it. The government did, because if we alerted the public too much, people would start freaking out. We didn't want, because the public was decidedly anti-war. So in 1939, there was a new act called Cash and Carry that was passed. And it said that any country could take advantage of American food, clothing, no weapons yet, but they had to come and pay cash for it, and they had to carry it away on their own ships, proving that we learned our lesson in World War I, because we never got paid back for all the food that we convoyed over the year before. We never got paid back. That stopped. This time we're going to make sure we get paid cash, no IOUs, carried away on their own ships, so that we wouldn't have our ships get bombed like we did in World War I. Again, that's what dragged us into World War I, was submarine warfare. So we wanted it to not make the same mistake again. So Roosevelt offered cash and carry. And he said, hey, to make sure that people didn't freak out and say, oh, you're just trying to get involved in the war. He said any country could take advantage of this. If Germany wanted to come over, they could. But he also knew this: Germans had submarines. That was their number one in the Navy. That was their thing, was submarines. Again, just like in World War I, they rebuilt their subs and they were using them again. So submarines aren't going to come all the way over and pick up food and clothing and put it in a submarine and go all the way back. That's just not what subs are for and what they do. So he knew that the Germans couldn't take advantage of cash and carry, but the British could. He's really aiming this at the British. But if anybody says you're siding with the British, he could always say, well, the Germans could take advantage of it too. That's how he kept that secret. The fall of France. France had a hangover from World War I. Remember that 4-year slugfest in the trenches of Europe. I mean, that thing went on for 4 years, and they were tired. And then when the same thing happened, this was like deja vu right here, is the Germans attacked neutral Belgium, went through there, took over Belgium. Hitler took Poland, he took Denmark, he took Norway, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And then next on his list of countries to take, France. That was where he was going after. And France was, like I said, had a hangover, and less than 30 days later, France surrendered. So they were added to this list of countries that were taken over by Germany. an eerie photo of Adolf Hitler taking a photo with the Eiffel Tower behind him after they took over France. And the scary thing about this whole thing is now Great Britain was all alone, right? At this point, Russia would have been on their side had it not been for the Non-Aggression Pact. So it was Great Britain and no one else. With the fall of France and the Non-Aggression Pact, there's nobody else involved. You might say the United States, but we are staying neutral. So basically, Great Britain was all alone, and Americans were really concerned. What happens if Great Britain falls? If Great Britain falls, then man, we're going to be in big trouble, because then it's the pressure is going to fall on the United States. And could it be possible for Hitler to take over the United States? Many believe that was his goal. So Americans started to get prepared, do everything in their power to be prepared for war without freaking people out. He called for the nation to massively build up its armed forces. And we had the one and only peacetime draft we've had in history. September 6, 1940, a year after World War II started, we had the first ever only peacetime draft. We're not involved in World War II. It's going on, but we're started drafting people into the military in 1940. People were issued cards like this. I had a student, his grandfather, this is his great-grandfather's draft card. Right here, he took a picture of it for me. And then we started building up, and I'll talk about the Lockheed Burbank aircraft plant later, and I'll probably do more in class with that.